Thanks for joining us at Family Talk. I'm Deb DeYoung, Labatt's parenting coach. With us is one of Canada's prominent child psychiatrists, Dr. Jean Clinton. Dr. Clinton has an impressive list of credentials. She is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences in the Division of Child Psychiatry at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. She's also an associate at the University of Toronto, on the staff at McMaster Children's Hospital, and is an associate consultant at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. These are just a few of Dr. Clinton's roles, on top of extensive community involvement and authoring papers. As an author, her focal areas include children's mental health, mental resilience, and adolescent brain development. So there we have it, a doctor, an academic, a clinical practitioner, and a community builder. It's great to have you on Family Talk. Jean, your career covers a lot of ground, but let's focus on one for now, neuroscience. Can you explain to us the main brain changes over the course of a child's development, and especially during the teen years?
Yes, well, this is one of the most exciting times in science because we're learning so much about the changes in the brain. So we always knew that the last part of pregnancy, in the first 3 years, tons of stuff is happening. But in the past 10, 15 years, there's been more exploration that sees that inside the teenage brain, there's tons of construction going on. So all the neurons, the brain cells that talk to each other, are being refined. They're speeding up what gets used, gets really wired, and the transmission is speeding up. So we always used to think it was hormones, but now we know many of the changes are the construction, the changes in the actual brain itself that leads to lots of the wonderful things about teens, but also, you know, some of the worrying things. So under construction is the neuroscience message in the teen years.
Well, let's talk about the difference between the emotional brain and the thinking brain. And to help parents recognize the difference, what are some examples of the emotional brain in action versus the thinking brain?
Yes, well, and this is one of the really brilliant insights that people who are able to look right inside the brain, have kids in the scanner, you know, the magnetic resonance imaging and doing things. So what they have seen is that the brain develops from the back to the front, so that some of the things that are developed in terms of physical ability are happening ahead of the very front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and that's the executive director. That's the stop, think about it, plan, is this a good idea? And then deep inside the brain, developing even faster than the thinking, is the emotional brain. So the brain of it's called the limbic system, so that is your emotions, your response to emotions. That area is really under lots of construction, thrill seeking, novelty seeking, this dangerous behavior. That's actually areas developing, getting a rush of reward chemicals happening ahead of the thinking brain. So this oops is very typical because the drive for the thrill is not stopped by the not a good idea until much later in development.
So then how do we account for the variation between teens? Some teens appear less in control than others.
Yes.
Does this reflect each person's brain maturing at a unique rate, or is it about personality differences?
Yeah, great question. The intense knowledge about this is not as high as what we know about structural, so there are some theories about it. So one, we know that girls' brains develop ahead of boys' brains, that the emotional maturity, the genetics, you know, what the different chromosomes, all of that does. So girls mature earlier than boys. We know that. Then the personality part of it, kids who are more extroverted, right? So who from very young age, you know, want more thrill and they're out there. There is a tendency for them to be a bit more on the thrill-seeking side. They need more of a bang to get kind of aroused, and so those kids can sometimes, on average, have more risky behaviors. But we don't have the deep science yet to say that's for sure. just hints.
So how can parents best make use of the knowledge that the emotional brain dominates during the teen years?
Yes, well, you know, I think one of the key messages I find helpful, one as a mum of 5 teenagers, as well as talking to other parents, is that if you know that it's under construction, that the kids are not doing this on purpose, it's not that they're doing it to drive you crazy, it's that the desire for that high excitement and low effort is part of the brain developing, and that the stop, plan, think about it, hold that impulse is going to develop later. And if you understand that they're not doing it on purpose, it's not that they've become an alien, that this is a normal part of development. But I think the other thing that's helpful to me as a parent and as a child psychiatrist is understanding that if we didn't have this thrill-seeking, check this out, how does this work, we wouldn't be here as a species. We would be, we wouldn't have explored, we wouldn't have gone out, we wouldn't have come up with some solutions like Alexander the Great was 16.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm. So parents often hear they need to trust their kids and let them know that they are trusted. But if kids don't live up to our trust, can we really hold them accountable given what we know about the stage of brain development?
Well, you know, trust is a tricky concept. So I prefer to think in terms of respectful relationships. And with respectful relationships comes trust. So if you have a respectful relationship, then you're talking to your kids about what's happening, the brain under construction. And you're saying, you know what, I know that you just blew up at me, or you have in your own head the dialogue, he blew up at me not because he's turning into this alien, but because his teen emotional brain is firing more. Once you have that respectful relationship that you're thinking about connecting through this, then you have more dialogue. You say, you know, I'm really worried about you going to this party. Are the parents going to be there? If you're going to be involved with kids who are drinking, how can you make sure that you are safe? What can you do? If there's drugs, how can you? So you have that do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. You have that conversation. Through that conversation, you develop the trust. Then when they screw up, like we do, and they do screw up, you don't say, oh, I can't trust you. You say, okay, let's review this. Huh? What went on? What can we do? So it's always, always about connecting and respectful relationships.
So then do you think it would be helpful for parents to try and educate their kids on how their brains are changing through adolescence? Or would the awareness make kids more careful about their choices, or would some of them see it as an excuse?
Yeah, oh my God. Great question again. So one, I think is important for parents to know about it. The best scenario is for kids to learn about it from each other, rather than the parents saying, now I want you to know that your brain is under construction, because I absolutely have heard back from parents. They said, oh, you know, I told my child that, and they said, oh, Mom, I did that because I'm under construction. Again, I love to hear that because it means that there's a relationship about that. So one, I think it's super important that kids know about what's going on in their brain. It helps them understand where some of their emotion, you know, how come I feel great and then I'm down in the dumps, and why did I do that thing? They won't tell us that they're asking that. Right. But I think for kids to know about this going on is really important. If teachers and parents and those around kids are all part of the, yeah, you know, we're all learning about this, that's far, far better. But kids also need to review it and examine it to see, what does that mean for me? If I tell them, no, then they're going to say, wow, yeah. But if they go, wow, then they're much more likely to be engaged in that learning.
So not too long ago, we blamed hormones for all the issues with adolescents. But what's the role of hormones given what we now know about brains? And do hormones really play any role at all?
Yeah, well, it's amazing. You know, I was recently in a meeting and somebody was saying, you know, it's all very well, you know, we've decided in the legal profession about how to do things, but you guys keep changing your mind. Well, the reality is we're not changing our minds, we're becoming better informed. And so we absolutely thought that it was hormones. It made a whole lot of sense. You know, ever since Plato, they've talked about teen years as, you know, chaos. But what we now know is that hormones, yes, play a role in what's happening, but they have a big influence on the brain development. So the major driver of the change in behavior that we see is not hormones, it is the changes in the brain. Some of the areas are triggered by hormonal changes, but it's not, and that to me, that's a thing that you can get your hands around. Yeah, so, oh, it's my brain, and I know now how to make my neurons connect by practice, practice, practice. Whereas if it's just hormones, oh my God, you know, I have no control over it.
Right.
But yeah, so it's hormones play a role, but we now know the brain is and the connections and experience that builds the brain is the major influencer.
Thank you, Dr. Clinton. So that's it for our first segment with Dr. Jean Clinton on the teenage brain. She's given us 2 vivid words to remember when dealing with teens: under construction. For the second video in this series, we'll be asking Dr. Clinton about relationships, food for the teenage brain.